in pain now. I've got injuries. Right, so I guess we'll start with Indie Ref 2. No, I don't know what it is. I just feeling it here. I was like, I think I've pulled something like here in my pec. It feels horrible.
Let's go. Can't leave that in the recording. We're recording. I'm injured now.
Hello and welcome to yet another podcast episode. This time in the light. We're not in the dark for once. Courtesy of scheduling issues and Elliot finding Jesus. We've decided to change it up this week. Again, going away from bullies that we've had for the last two episodes. No more bullies for us. Well, we hope. Indie Ref 2, that's the topic for today. Do you want to break it down for us?
Well, the Supreme Court decided that they couldn't do it without the consent of the UK government, which is obviously never going to happen. I found it was 2014 before the first Indie Ref, and the government put out a 10 myths and 10 facts article on the website. There's just scaremongering, basically. So they were saying, the myth was that, Scotland have great trade deals. And then the fact was, nope, you wouldn't get the trade deals the UK have made. You couldn't play the national lottery. They said, oh, well, you can't buy a ticket in France. Why would you be able to buy one in Scotland?
The important stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So they said joining the EU would take too long. They're like, just look at Croatia. That took 8 years. That there wouldn't be a currency, like shared currency or currency sort of agreement. It was a lot of scaremongering, and that was for the first one. So the government's never gonna let it happen this time.
I mean, there's mixed opinions in terms of what Scotland would get out of a referendum to leave. What would happen if they were to become independent? I mean, they do have 60% of their trade is with England, and only 19% is with the EU. So basically, they would have to rely on the EU more or less bailing them out, because the England, at least, or the UK government would be imposing so many restrictions then upon Scotland, because they'd be leaving the single market. They would have asked to retain the currency for a period before they could implement their own Scottish sterling. They've asked for. I think they asked to retain the Queen or King now. I think they asked to retain the monarch as like a head of state.
Canada does so.
Yeah, I think they asked to, and I think I can't remember the list. There was a variety of some really weird demands that they want, of things they wanted to keep, and it was like, why are you leaving then, sort of thing. It's like, and I mean, like again, like going back to the single market point, like if they were to leave, like experts believe it could prove disastrous for a variety of reasons. One of them being the deficit. Scotland has the largest public deficit in the UK out of all nations. I think the number I found here in 2020, 2021, the government statistics from Scotland said that they spent £36.3 billion more than they raised in tax revenue.
Wow.
Like they would have to, before go. It's one thing to go ahead with the referendum. For them to implement the referendum results, they'd probably still remain within the United Kingdom for quite a few years, because it would take so long to get all these steps put in place that they would actually be like, it would be viable for them to become independent as such.
I think that there's other issues. I mean, you look at how the government have handled Northern Ireland and trade, especially from the Republic of Ireland through Northern Ireland into the UK. It's just been an absolute mess. And if Scotland were independent and, had trade deals with, some of the Scandinavian countries, makes sense. They're very close. There could be issues there. Trying to, if stuff's coming over into England, there's going to be checks at the border. It just adds a whole another level of chaos. And like the first referendum, 55.3% voted no, which is not as close as the Brexit vote, and as everyone's been told many, many times, get over it, deal with it, it's done.
Yeah, I think
In a
it's
way, go on.
Sorry, I was gonna say, I think another big point to make here. You've got those numbers you stated from the last referendum. The reason that we've come back to this topic over and over again is probably because of Brexit more than
Oh, yeah.
anything else. I mean, again, like the numbers, 62% of people in Scotland voted to remain, which has definitely put an onus now on a new referendum. Because more and more people in Scotland are saying, well, we didn't vote to leave the EU.
Yeah.
So can we, they don't feel that their own democratic decision is respected, even though technically the referendum was a UK-wide referendum. So it should be respected. But that's definitely created an issue for Westminster. And also the SNP, following the court's judgment, they basically said that they respected the judgment, but that if the UK government continues to deny them the referendum, then they are denying both the SNP mandate in Holyrood, because they've got a majority of seats there, 62, I think. And obviously their mandate they were voted for, and they're a nationalist party looking for independence. And also that the UK government, what was it said now? What was her saying? Oh yeah, and also said that next general election would be an informal referendum, basically.
It's going to be interesting, I think, for everyone at the next election. 2019, Boris Johnson got elected on a huge mandate. That has been eroded significantly. I think Rishi Sunak's come in. I know this is back to the UK, but Rishi Sunak's come in to try and repair some of that damage. But certainly be interesting to see where the whole UK goes next. When is it? 2024, 25?
Yeah.
Unless something happens and one gets called earlier, which can't see happening. But to see where, though, if there's still the pockets that went blue, stay blue, see what happens in Scotland.
It's too unpredictable at the moment.
The thing is, obviously, Keir Starmer said he says they won't get a second referendum.
Yeah.
So I think the SNP could pick up a fair few. I think they'll still have quite a big mandate in Scotland. But the other thing I briefly mentioned, Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, there's still a huge there's unionists and loyalists in Scotland, nationalists, Republicans. Just look at Rangers Celtic. That is called the Old Firm Derby for a reason. It's Protestants v Catholics. There's Orange Order marches through Glasgow. The things that happen and still continue to happen in Northern Ireland there's pockets of that in Scotland as well. I don't think it's as simple as we want to be an independent country. I think there's the political, there's the religious aspects of it that's still hugely ingrained in, certainly in Glasgow at least anyway. But when Glasgow's got one of the biggest populations in Scotland, and you look at the violence on football day in Glasgow, there's certainly other things that need to be considered. And if there was a second referendum and Scotland did become an independent country, I think certain aspects of that could boil over somewhat.
There's just too much division still. You bring up the example of Republic of Ireland, Northern Ireland. That in general is already a very complicated issue. But take the example of like Northern Ireland, for example, has struggled. I don't remember how long it's been now, but they've been without a government in Stormont for a couple of years, at least, and they regularly have issues because of the division between parties, those who are unionists and those who are Republicans. and Scotland would have to go through the same thing again. Like
Mm.
you look at the numbers of people supporting a referendum. It is, even if there was to be a majority, it would probably be Brexit proportions.
Mm.
We're talking, which would basically see half the country, or just about half the country, saying they want to remain. And if, say it's a 51-49 split, that's a lot of people that are going to be very disappointed and very upset.
Yeah.
And they're not, I mean, what does Scotland do then?
It's I can't see it happening. I think the SNP are going to keep pushing for it. Nicola Sturgeon, especially, that's part of her. That why she got elected as part of her manifesto. But certainly after the Supreme Court say no, can't do it, you're going to have to get permission from Westminster, and everyone in Westminster said not going to happen. I think they're a bit in limbo, to be honest. I don't really think there's much they can do about it. I don't know where I would sit with it. I think Scotland's decision to make. It all comes back to Brexit, as most things do these days.
Yeah.
I think it's
like a rash you can't get rid of.
Oh, so many creams. We've tried so many creams, and the rash does not go away.
Basically, it's I was reading. So obviously, Nicola Sturgeon held a press conference and released some comments following the judgment, and she said that they viewed the view that the UK is a voluntary partnership of nations, where a so-called, and this is my quoting her, where a so-called partnership in which one partner is denied the right to choose a different future, or even to ask itself question, cannot be described in any way as voluntary or even partnership at all. So it's basically saying that the ruling confirms that the notion of the UK, a voluntary partnership of nations, if it ever was a reality, is no longer a reality, and that it exposes a situation that's quite simply unsustainable. Now, like, sorry, you gonna say something?
No, I was just saying if it's a voluntary partnership of nations, then it should be a voluntary partnership of nations. It shouldn't be, if you want to leave, then you need to get permission. You need to ask us. You've got to go to the people. So too many hoops. It's again that 2014 article I found. I was reading it. I was like, this is just government propaganda against. And I suppose it's their prerogative to do it, but the thing is,
they're like, they criticized the decision, but they held a referendum in 2014. That referendum was called a once-in-a-lifetime referendum. It is a decision that is not something to be taken lightly, and there was a majority for remaining in the UK. Now, fine, they may say that they still have a mandate for independence because they keep getting elected as the majority party within Holyrood, but they forget that as devolved nations go, they've got the strongest powers out of any of the devolved nations. They've got more autonomy from Westminster than any of the other devolved nations. Westminster's already given them most of they control their own NHS, they control education, they control so many other aspects of public life.
They control the courts is completely different in Scotland.
Yeah, all that they have to rely on the UK for really is more in a financial sense. They rely because they are part of the single market, the single currency within the UK. They don't get to set their own interest rates or anything like that. It's all controlled by the Bank of England. But considering that, they've got a lot of power already within Scotland. All this is it's more of an image thing more than a practical. We don't want to be in the UK. It's just simply we don't like the UK. We don't like Westminster. We want to completely cut ties. But then, like, I was reading an article earlier, and they were saying basically, if Scotland were to leave, imagine Calais, but on the Scottish border instead. So imagine what happened after Brexit, but that's going to be in the north, and that's going to be with your largest trading partner.
It's all very Game of Thrones, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's all not calling everyone in Scotland the wildlings, but wildlings coming to the wall, trying to get south because the White Walkers are coming. It's interesting.
Originally, Hadrian's Wall was built for a reason.
But if they did become independent, had their own currency, sort of end that, using Scottish notes in England, going, it's legal tender.
That's a better attempt at an accent than my American one last week.
Yeah, we the fact you started and then we just ended, we'll gloss over that. But yeah, I mean, I think India F2, Scotland aren't going to get it, so maybe let's move on to something else Scotland aren't going to get, and that's the World Cup, because they're not there. Qatar is Qatar. Sorry to anyone Scottish listening. Qatar has understandably been under fire for hosting the World Cup. 6,500 migrant worker deaths, building the stadiums. Having a winter World Cup, you're going to be building stadiums in over 40-degree heat with little to no water, little to no breaks. It is, it's not good.
Have you felt excited at all about this World Cup? Because I definitely haven't. I've watched the games, but I've not felt,
I think for me, because it's a winter World Cup, obviously the Premier League and the Championship in the UK have stopped. League One and League Two are carrying on. And if you're a fan of a League One and League Two football team, like I am, your season just carries on.
Yeah.
And I think there'll be some games played when the World Cup games are on. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with attendances and things. But I think it's been so disruptive to our season. And I'm sure, because I think the Bundesliga and other leagues they carried on, didn't they?
They've got Christmas breaks.
Yeah.
So they're fine. They get 3 or 4 weeks off. The Premier League and the Championship, English leagues don't do that. So it's disrupted the English season quite badly. I mean, basically you're forcing players to play in shorter spaces of time, and players are already playing too many games as it is, as studies have found. They're already playing too many games in a season when you take into consideration, especially those playing in clubs that are playing both top league, European, 2 cups, and then playing for their national team across an entire year. They're averaging 60 to 70 games a year, potentially, depending on how far they go in all those competitions. That is mad. For a professional sports player, they've all said it's too much. They love their sport, but it's too much.
It'll be imagine like players that have been at the World Cup and playing in 35-degree heat in the winter, or however hot it is, and then they come back in at Christmas and have to go to Newcastle where it's -3 on a Tuesday night.
It could be. I was saying it would be worse going to Stoke.
Imagine the injuries that's going to happen. Like, your muscles are so used to being warm, and then you've got to do more warm-ups. I would love to see the figures and stats if there are more injuries when players come back.
It will be interesting. I mean, saying that again, going back to what was before, like, you and I don't feel that excited over the World. I mean, I'm quite disappointed in the way that I don't feel as excited. Like, okay, I've usually always got England in a World Cup, but Canada, for example, are in our first World Cup since the 80s.
Yeah,
and we should be automatically in for the next one because we're hosting it, and I should be excited. And I am watching the games, but I'm just like, this is not the World Cup I imagined I'd get to watch Canada play for the first time in my lifetime, and it's actually quite disappointing.
Yeah, I've not felt excited. I haven't bought any sticker books. I'm not. Most of the people I've spoken to are like, but yeah, I still found myself watching some of Tunisia v Australia for some reason because it was on.
Of all the games to choose.
Of all the games to choose, yeah, Tunisia v Australia. I think you can't ignore what's gone on. I think that's the key point. And a lot of the pundit, like Roy Keane, was on ITV saying, shouldn't have been here, should never have been here. In the first place, shouldn't have been here.
But who also said that? Qatari representatives have said that. I was saying to you earlier. So I was listening to the News Agents, lovely podcast, and someone who John Sopel knows or whatever basically said to him that the Qataris now regret spending $200 billion to host this World Cup, because they've gone from being a unknown state, more or less, in the dark. I think makes this point, in fact, being an unknown entity that was very wealthy and no one really cared that much about, because they were kind of overshadowed by Saudi Arabia and so on, other countries that have similarly bad policies from a Western point of view, the sort of things that we've been denouncing, at least. And now they've come out into the light, and they're suddenly getting a lot of flack for their policies, a lot of flack for the fact that, whilst inconclusive, we are more or less quite confident that they bribed their way to hosting this World Cup. So it's like, and basically, this Qatari representative, who's an official who worked within the bidding process, has said, more or less, why did we do it?
Yeah.
And imagine that the amount of people that have died working on these stadiums, the amount of money they've spent, that $200 billion is way more than what any other country has ever spent on a World Cup.
And you look at, what happened in Rio 2016 for the Olympics. Was it 2016? Yeah, 2016 in Rio. And the stadiums are just empty now because they were purpose-built stadiums.
They've all fallen apart.
And they're not used. And it's going to be the same in Qatar. When are you ever going to need to fill 40,000, 60,000 seat stadiums again?
Yeah.
In the smallest country to ever host a World Cup.
I mean, the stadiums are all within 2 hours of each other, I think.
Yeah. It's not like when it was in Russia and there was a 13-hour drive. Again, Russia probably,
No, shouldn't have hosted there as well. Considering 2014 in Crimea.
Yeah. But who was it? See that when Simon Brodkin, the prankster, when he got into the Sepp Blatter press conference and threw the money, that image was so iconic, because that was before that was when there were inklings that something dodgy had gone on. But that was when the famous picture of Sepp Blatter surrounded by these falling banknotes, and you hear him say, "Oh, cheers, Sepp. Yeah, this is for North Korea 2026." Like,
yeah.
And
if I'm allowed to post it, I'll put the video in.
Yeah,
it would look brilliant. Just for those of you who don't know what we're talking about. But yeah, I completely get what you mean. It's like FIFA, we already knew back then, was corrupt. I say that to you. I got this. Al Jazeera have done a timeline basically of events from the moment that they were awarded up until the summer of this year. And I mean, obviously, then more have come out of it. Like, you've had the whole argument about LGBTQ rights and FIFA changing policy multiple times around what you can wear in stadium. I mean, literally the day they finally said they said that now you can wear like rainbow colored hats and shirts. I think it is in stadiums. Whereas before, if you had them, you were barred entry or told to remove them.
Yeah.
And then, also Infantino, that weird press conference.
I was about to bring that up. That was bizarre.
Today I am gay.
Today I am Saudi. Today I am Arab. Like,
today I'm disabled. And he tried to say as well that he'd been persecuted because he had red hair.
He's got no hair now, and he's still a bit of a dodgy character. But I think world football has so many deep-rooted issues that go far beyond the people at the top. It's far beyond Sepp Blatter and Infantino and Platini. There's been a sort of culture around it for so many years that people know, a little backhander here, a little backhander there will get you where you need to be. It's the reason the UK didn't get the World Cup in 2018. Because
I was about to say that there was a British parliamentary inquiry into it, and they found that the Issa Hayatou of Cameroon and Jacques Anouma of the Ivory Coast were apparently paid by Qatar when England were trying to make their bid for the World Cup. Yeah,
the bid was so good, and there was such a buzz about it. Hillsborough was on the list. Hillsborough hosted games I think it hosted games in the '66 World Cup. It's hosted Euro 96 games, Denmark and Sweden. Was it Denmark and Sweden? Denmark were definitely in the city centre. The city centre was full of Danish flags.
But it's not on the shortlist for Euro 2028.
No, and
It's a shame, but
the Hillsborough needed that in 28. If we'd have got it in 2018, there'd have been so much money pumped into the stadium. It's crumbling to bits. But it's hosted games like that in the past. Bramall Lane obviously hosts them now. Hosted the Women's Euros and it was great. Didn't go to Bramall Lane. Did go to Rotherham though, which was also good, but is not big enough to host, a Euro or a World Cup game. It comes down to should never have been in Qatar. Sheffield's the home of football. I think for the list for 2028, there should be a stadium on the list. It's football wouldn't be football without Sheffield, the world's oldest football club. I think the world's second oldest football club, the world's oldest football ground, professional football stadium. Without the Sheffield rules, there wouldn't be. There's a reason they are the world's first. And I think, again, this is far away from Qatar, a few thousand miles away from Qatar. But I think the issues come down to far, far beyond backhanders and side payments.
It's sad when it's like we as fans, we hear the word FIFA and we immediately assume bribery. That is natural now. Fans do not trust FIFA. They don't trust UEFA either, really, but FIFA's even worse. And for what is supposed to be the biggest sport in the world and the biggest sporting event in the world, I think Olympics, and as far as I'm aware, probably does actually push top spot, but the World Cup definitely, for the Football World Cup definitely is up there, at least as number 2. And for the biggest sport in the world, you would imagine there would be better handling for it to get there. But in fact, all it is it's become the biggest sport in the world because people can pay each other to do as they please.
Yeah.
And the representatives at FIFA are all too happy to take money. I mean, I was reading about people talking about millions of dollars being paid by Qatar to FIFA officials and officials within African footballing FAs. And the UK's bid was to simply take some officials for a fancy dinner that cost a couple grand per person. And that's what we did. Whereas the Qataris were like, here's $1 million, vote for us.
Yeah. I mean, I think, most footballing corporations have something, some skeletons in the closet. Just look at the refereeing standards in the lower leagues of football in the UK, and
talk about refereeing standards in general as well.
I mean, some of the refereeing at the World Cup has been questionable.
That opening game, the offside.
Yeah.
I can't remember who it was now. But Qatar conceded a goal. Inside 5 minutes, I think it was. And the offside, if you looked at it, was basically nothing.
Yeah.
You could barely tell that there was a part of the body that can be used to play football over the offside line. And how VAR came to that conclusion, we will never know.
I absolutely hate football with a passion, but I also love it with the same passion. And
that's got to go on a t-shirt.
Yeah, I hate football, but I love football. And I think that with it's in Qatar, we can't change that. But what we can do is question why it was there. We can, the pundits are doing it to some respect, and speaking out and asking these questions. Why did this happen? Why is it here? Are LGBTQ plus fans going to be safe? I think they need to use the platform that they've got. They could boycott it altogether, but then if you can go there and I assume they're being paid by the corporations that they're working for. But it's interesting, on the BBC, how does that work with impartiality and things like that? If they,
Well, I was going to say to make that point. So the opening game, BBC, obviously, for us in the UK, BBC was they were the ones with the coverage for that opening game, and Gary Lineker had promised beforehand that they would be discussing the issue, and I think they spent the hour that they had pre-match in their pre-match ramble. They spent at least half an hour, I think, sort of taking apart the bid and Qatar and everything. And we would say we may agree with their points, but at the same time, doesn't that go against BBC guidelines and Ofcom and the rules that we set out for our broadcasters to follow? And it's a fine line, because when it's something like this, you could argue that they have every right to take it apart, considering that most of the media in the UK has done that. But at the same time, it's also, I mean, this is FIFA's point. This is the point that FIFA have made the entire tournament and before the tournament and everything. Because FIFA have the policy on it as well. No political statements are allowed. Now, that's fine, but they also basically incorporated wearing a rainbow-colored hat into being a political statement.
I've seen people say that who aren't really fussed about it, and a lot of people have taken the rainbow armband as an example and say, "Oh, it's a political statement. Shouldn't be doing it. Virtue signaling, etc., etc., etc." And say, "All right, then what about a poppy on a shirt?" You look at James McLean, plays for Republic of Ireland, doesn't wear a poppy on his shirt, and gets booed for it every game because he doesn't wear a poppy because of what British soldiers have done in Ireland. It's the same thing. You can't have it both ways. You can't say, well, you can't do that because that's a political statement, but that bit's fine because that's our political statement.
Yeah.
But I think that's more the world in general, to be honest.
I mean, you get like, I think there should be nothing wrong with wearing a poppy. Same as you should be able to wear a symbol that isn't. It's not really an overtly political symbol. No. It's like the poppy. The whole point of it is it's something we wear at a time of the year where we remember those who lost their lives in world wars, both world wars. And yes, for some like McLean, he won't wear it because of his own political views, and in a way that's fine, and he gets booed for it or whatever. But you respect that he has his own views.
Yeah.
When it comes to the armband that people were going to wear, the One Love armband, literally, like this, it's the same thing. It's just an armband that says One Love inside a heart.
Yeah.
And I mean, the only reason FIFA would have even thought to say ban that is purely going to be because of the fact that there was so much media attention to it beforehand relating to Qatar's human rights record and its record on LGBTQ rights and women's rights. Otherwise, I mean, the sort of examples I think of when it comes to these forms of politics, I think of, for example, Granit Xhaka, Xherdan Shaqiri for Switzerland, players like that who have celebrated doing, I can't remember what it looks like. I think it's something like that. I think it's that at least. If you're watching this, then you'll see it. If you're not, but it's like it's sort of representative of the Albanian bird, and I think it's related to the Kosovo War. Because that is their heritage. A lot of the Swiss team come from the Balkans.
Yeah.
And they regularly celebrate goals making those surplus, and they get fined for it. The Swiss FA gets fined for it, and there's nothing more you can do about it. But players do that regularly, and FIFA haven't really cracked down on it as such. They've not made it like next time you do it, you're getting a 3-match ban or something like that.
It's the same with Austria as well. So a lot of Austrian players, like there's a player used to play for Sheffield Wednesday called Atinuiu. He played in Austria, played for Austria up to under 21s, but it was from Pristina when it was part of Yugoslavia. but now plays for Kosovo and, you know, has that chance to represent his country, not,
Yeah.
you know, making the statements elsewhere. I think, yeah, football's a completely different. There's so many facets to football that we could fill like 7 hours really with.
That's how I feel. I've just got to say it's a bit of and you know, I love watching football. I mean, I love a lot of sports, but this World Cup has definitely tarnished the sport's reputation right from the off. So
Absolutely.
And I think that's the easiest way to sum it up. But yeah, I think that's where we'll leave it for today.
Thanks for joining us on another episode of What Not Another One.
And yeah, still working on getting it out on other places, but for YouTube version, it's hopefully going to go up same day even, if I can get through this in time and get rid of all these little cuts I have to make and put in the little bleeps. But yeah, we hope you enjoyed another one. And yeah, no, a bit of an odd video, to be fair. Scotland to Qatar.
Yeah, we're basically just a thing Scotland aren't going to get kind of episode.
I look forward to creating a thumbnail now.